I am Dina Nunziato. I am the clinical director at Anxiety Institute here in Greenwich. And this is the presentation. I just want to see if I can forward my slides. Okay, here we go. And this is Mindfulness, Managing Stress and Developing Self-Care Through Mindfulness. One of the things that I really enjoy about this particular presentation is its relevance, quite frankly. I'm going to be speaking to you all about how to work with your teenagers, with your young adults and your adolescent population to help them develop self-care through mindfulness. But the piece I really like about this, and when I do this in person with classrooms, what I really like about it is it has as much relevance, in my opinion, it has as much relevance for the caregivers, for the social workers and the guidance counselors and the professors and the teachers out there as it does for the clients. So as we go through this, what I would really like you to do, if you're paying attention and taking notes and trying to think about how to use this potentially to work with your students or the clientele you work with, I want you also to think about this for yourself. And again, when I work with students, one of the things that the students enjoy the most is when I kind of turn the tables and ask their teachers these questions. And when I was doing this with a college population, I would turn the tables and ask the professors. And students love listening to how the adults handle these things as well. So keep in mind as I'm going through this that I'm speaking as much to you all about developing your own self-care through mindfulness as I am talking about helping our adolescents and teenagers and young adults develop self-care through mindfulness. Okay, so we know this. We know that adolescence is a uniquely stressful developmental stage, right? I don't know if many of us would willingly go back to adolescence if we could. I certainly have talked to enough clients and enough students in my years where they would talk about how middle school and high school and sometimes even early college are just some of the most difficult developmental stages that they've experienced. And obviously some of that is because of all the demands that life and society and family and school place on our young adults and adolescents, academics, family responsibilities, extracurriculars. Certainly we could have a whole discussion about social issues as what we do these days with our students around COP. So that's why I've kept this picture up for the 3 slides of this poor young woman who has her head in her hands around everything that she's got to do. And of course, all of this, we need to take into account that our adolescents this past year have had the overwhelming stress of managing these pressures in the middle of a global pandemic. So this presentation I've designed over the years, it has a lot of relevance pre-pandemic, and hopefully will have a lot of relevance when we ultimately get to a post-pandemic state, which hopefully we're getting to slowly. Maybe it's around the corner, but certainly this year, our young adults, our adolescents have been faced with enormous stressors and are really struggling to manage everything that we just talked about in the middle of the demands and I go so far as to say the deprivations of a global pandemic. So I want to focus initially, the first part of this conversation is going to focus on defining stress and really helping us understand what stress is. So that is the first question that I ask. What is stress? All right. So lots of definitions of stress, but the definition that I'm going to use is stress is a conscious or unconscious, psychological or physical state resulting from physical or mental demand that challenges adaptive capacities. So that's a mouthful, right? Stress can be conscious or unconscious. It can have its roots in the psychological or the physical. It can create physical demands or mental demands. But basically, the last part is what I want you to focus on, that challenges adaptive capacities. Okay? Now, when we talk about stress, most of the time, we're talking about stress that has a negative connotation to it, right? When we talk about, I'm so stressed out. we're talking about stress that is overwhelming stress or unhealthy stress. But I did want to spend just a few moments talking about the fact that stress in and of itself is not a negative state. So this is the Yerkes-Dodson stress curve. I like this slide. I don't necessarily like all of the words that they used in this slide, but I like this slide a lot because I think this slide does a really nice job of showing us this bell curve where we have our stress level along the horizontal axis and performance along the vertical axis. And we can see with this bell curve that at the top of the bell curve, where our stress level is optimized, our performance is also optimized. So let's just spend a minute looking at this visual and thinking about this visual for a moment. Because what this visual tells us is that stress in and of itself is not a negative thing. In fact, what we aim for is a healthy level of stress in order for us to feel alive and engaged and operating at peak performance. And I want to go just step back for a second. The goal here is not just to talk about peak performance or superior achievement. It's really to talk about health and well-being, but this slide talks about it as peak performance. But I could just as easily call this, healthy balance. So I'm going to look over here at the left-hand side of the bell curve for a second and talk about when we're in this band here. I don't know if you can see my cursor. When they're in this band here of optimum stress, we're feeling motivated, we're feeling focused, we're feeling engaged, we're feeling as though the challenges in our life are meeting our abilities. Okay, we're at that stage where we're kind of firing on all cylinders, we're engaged, we're active, and that's ultimately this space right about here is what we're aiming for. Now, kids love it when I talk about this because they kind of get a chuckle out of the word lame, but I can ask you to remember a time, and again, adolescents can typically remember a time where they didn't have enough to do, where they were maybe it was summer break, or maybe it was a time in their lives where they just weren't challenged enough, they were inactive, they were bored, they sort of just didn't have enough challenge in their life. And some of us, for those of us that have been in a classroom setting, you can often see when children or adolescents are not challenged enough, we can definitely see that there is, that is also not a desirable state when they are not challenged enough, right? But for our purposes today, we really are going to talk about this right side of the bell curve. We're going to talk about what happens when the stress and the challenges go beyond what we are necessarily capable of, beyond peak capacity, and we get into a state where the stress, the challenges start to overwhelm our adaptive capacities. And so we feel fatigued, we feel exhausted. This is also where anxiety can kick in, and we can talk about that a little bit later on. We get into a stress overload state, we get into a burnout state. So really, for our purposes today, we're going to talk about stress on the right side of the curve, but please keep in mind that stress in and of itself is not a negative thing, and we need to keep a certain level, certain measure of healthy stress in our lives in order for us to feel challenged. Okay. So let's talk for a moment, if we would, about the stress response. Some of you may be familiar with the stress response. The stress response, also known as fight, flight, or freeze, used to be fight or flight for a long time. Recently, within the last decade or so, they've also added freeze, because freeze is another stress response. So fight, flight, or freeze, it's a primitive response. It's part of our autonomic nervous system. It's initiated by the body in reaction to a perceived threat. Right? So you've probably heard this before, but if you're walking in the woods and suddenly an enormous bear comes out and starts charging at you, your body is going to have a stress response. It's an activation of your sympathetic nervous system, and it is designed to protect you. It is designed to send the signal that you are in danger and that your body needs to go into a protective mode. And the protective mode, either you're going to fight, you're going to flee, or you're going to freeze. Sometimes, depending on the type of bear, you may actually want to freeze and drop to the ground and be immobile, and in that way protect yourself. So that's the stress response. That is the activation of our sympathetic nervous system. Here is a slide. I kind of like this slide. It's a slide that illustrates our autonomic nervous system. So our autonomic nervous system, there are two branches. There's the sympathetic nervous system that I just talked about. You can see here, it's where the stress response lives. It is pro-inflammatory. The really good news, and we're going to talk about this a lot today, the really good news is that our autonomic nervous system is a balanced system. So just as we have a sympathetic response, the stress response, there's also the parasympathetic relaxation response, the parasympathetic part of our nervous system. So again, we're going to talk a lot today about balance. We're going to talk a lot today about achieving balance. So and you're going to see this slide again, but this is our autonomic nervous system. It is designed to balance, for balance, I should say. And just a little bit more about balance. So when we are stressed, the body must return to baseline. And again, the way it returns to baseline is that the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in and the body relaxes. So when it relaxes, it builds up its stores of energy. It recalibrates the stress hormones for the next stressor. Okay. If the body does not return to baseline, if the body does not rebalance, if what we end up with are stressor upon stressor upon stressor, and we don't get that rebalancing, we end up in a state of chronic stress. And that's what a lot of us are in right now. A lot of us in this time of COVID, a lot of our students are in a state of chronic stress. So again, if the stressors don't resolve, or if we just have a long string of stressor upon stressor upon stressor, the body experiences chronic stress. And these are just some drawings of what happens, the effects of chronic stress. I'm not going to spend a long time on this because I've got some questions that I want to ask you in a minute. So how do you know when you're experiencing chronic stress? And this is actually where I would love if you all would put in the chat or the Q&A. Michael, what do you prefer, the chat or the Q&A? You're muted.
Geez. Chat's fine. We can do chat. Okay. That's okay.
So I'm going to wait a second. And if you all could just sort of type in, how do you know when you're experiencing chronic stress? So again, we can talk sort of globally about these things. But one of the most important things that I want to talk about today is that this is very individualized. And so what's very important is that each of us start to know our bodies and start to pay attention to the signals that our bodies send to us when we are stressed. So the signals rather that my body sends to me may not be the same signals that your body sends to you. So how do you know? What happens? How do you know when you're experiencing chronic stress? What are some of
a lot of responses?
Yeah, we're getting a lot of responses.
Good. Can you just kind of read them out to me?
Yeah. So tiredness, my eyes begin to twitch, body aches, pain, not sleeping at all, sleeping and eating problems, anxiety, feelings of being overwhelmed, hunger, grouchiness. This is funny. When I'm stressed, I go into monkey mind.
Yep. Do you all know what monkey mind is? Monkey mind is when your thoughts are jumping everywhere. Kind of think about monkeys jumping from tree to tree. Yeah.
I feel like that resonates with all of us.
Yeah.
Lots about exhaustion, eating, irritability, just pure body, of the effects of people's bodies, no energy.
Okay. So I want to say, that's great. Now, I don't mean it's great. I'm very sorry that everyone out there does experience that. But what is good news is that people understand their body's signals. Okay. You understand your body's signals. You understand that when your body is sending you these signals, it means something. And obviously, my next point is that we need to pay attention to those signals. But before I go there, I want to show you some slides. When I do this in person, I actually use a whiteboard or a blackboard and start kind of writing your answers down and start grouping them. But for the purposes of Zoom and the purposes of PowerPoint, I've done it this way. So how do you know when you're experiencing chronic stress? Well, there are physical stress signals, okay? We just heard about some of these. Headaches, and this is obviously not an exhaustive list. Headaches, stomach distress, hives. Some people actually, their skin tells them when they're stressed. Shortness of breath, fatigue, racing heart, difficulties with sleep. Those are some of the physical stress signals. There are emotional stress signals: tearfulness, anxiety, depression, panic, irritability. I will tell you, and I sometimes get a laugh out of my students when I tell them this, that I have adult children now. When my children were young, they could tell you when mommy was stressed. And they could tell you when mommy was stressed because mommy got very snappy and very grouchy and just had a much shorter fuse. So that was one of my signs that I was experiencing stress, anger, lack of interest. So again, not an exhaustive list, but definitely emotional stress signals there. Let's see, what else do we have? We have behavioral stress signals, okay? And this is an important one when you're working with adolescents and young adults, because we often find that adolescents and young adults are looking for a type of relief from their stress. And sometimes you see smoking, alcohol use, substance use, eating, sometimes spending, and then sometimes there's social isolation and poor work performance. So again, so far we've covered physical signals, emotional signals, behavioral signals, and the last grouping is cognitive. Again, I think this has a lot of relevance to the populations that we work with. Stress can reveal itself, concentration difficulties, forgetfulness, diminished creativity. Sometimes we even see paranoia, catastrophizing, overgeneralizing. We just don't function optimally cognitively when we're stressed. So we've got these sort of 4 buckets. We might be able to come up with more, but as I think about this, and when I talk to my clients and my students about this, I usually start writing and grouping so that we can get them thinking about, okay, do I experience physical signals? What are some of the behavioral signals? What are some of the cognitive? What are some of the emotional? And really start to get a handle on what are the signs and signals that my body sends to me. So I'm just going to take a minute here and ask everyone who's listening to me, if you could just kind of jot down for yourself, if you haven't already, what your own constellation of signs and signals are that you're stressed. Again, for me, I've already told you that I tend to get snappy. I tend to be a little more reactive than normal. I also get headaches. I'm a headache person, so my neck and my head and my shoulders start to tense up. My partner is his stomach. His stomach seizes up, and he doesn't get headaches, but he gets stomach stuff. So this, and I'm sorry this slide is a little difficult to read, but this is impact of chronic stress on the body. And we'll go sort of from head to toe. We've got mood issues that we've talked about already. Increased blood pressure. These are some of the scary things that happen with long-term chronic stress. So I'm not going to I don't want to stress you out further, but changes in skin tone, we talked about before, hives, definitely there's gut impact, and then even cortisol, even the stress hormones will increase and stay elevated. All right, so we know that there is a great impact of stress and chronic stress on the body. Again, I'm going to be back to the good news here. The good news is our bodies were designed for balance. Our bodies were designed to balance themselves out if we give it the chance. If we give our bodies the chance to balance, and for every stress response we have, for every stress we have, if we can counter it, if we can balance it with a relaxation response, then we're in a much better place to be healthy. So again, please keep this in mind for yourselves, as well as for the students and the clients that you work with. So this is just another balance slide. Regular activation of the relaxation response can help balance the stress of our lives. So again, it's all about balance. It's all about eliciting the relaxation response. And part of what my presentation is about today is really about being very conscious of eliciting the relaxation response. So that's part of what we're going to talk about today. How do you elicit the relaxation response? So let me go to the next slide and then take a minute and tell you that just like we've been talking about picking up on our own individual signals for stress and how we know we're stressed, those cognitive and physical and emotional and behavioral signals, we're also going to have individual ways in which we elicit the relaxation response. So this is a word cloud of ways that I elicit the relaxation response. So you see breathe in big green letters. We'll spend a little bit of time on that today. I definitely use the breath to help myself calm down, to ground myself. I try to take walks. I will have a hot tea. You'll see hot tea in a couple of different places. I also like to do puzzles. I like to take walks. So there's a number of different things that I can do to elicit the relaxation response. We're going to spend a little bit more time on that, but I'm going to ask you the question next. How do you elicit the relaxation response? So think about yourself. Think about what you know about yourself. Think about the ways in which you bring yourself back into balance. And if you wouldn't mind putting it in the chat, we can spend a little bit of time talking about how each of you elicit the relaxation response.
So, Dina, we have a lot in the chat saying exercising, running and walking, golfing, group phone calls with my siblings. I love that one. Disconnect and try to do something mindless, painting, prayer, pause, reading, meditation, deep breathing, walking on the beach, going for a walk, snuggling with my pets, playing the guitar, time with friends, work in my vegetable garden, outdoor activities, essential oils, breathing, stretching, walking.
Love it. Love it. All of it. It's
It.
fabulous. And now I can say it's fabulous and truly mean it, right? These are wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. So I put a few on this slide that I've heard over the years. And a lot of those were just said. Certainly pets are a big de-stressor. A lot of people talk to friends. I'm not sure if we heard listen to music in the chat, but music can be a very, very powerful way of eliciting different emotions. Certainly if calm is the emotion you're going for, if recentering, there's obviously music you can do for that. Some of these, and I actually did decide that I would put, I thought I put it on here and now I can't find it. I thought I put video game, oh, there it is, play video games. I put it on here because I know that sometimes for some students, this becomes sort of a time suck and they get lost in this. But I actually think for many of our students, if they can set a timer and be pretty prescribed about it to play a video game, for a half an hour, 40 minutes, set a timer, do it, get your head in a different space and then turn that off. If there's that ability to do that, playing video games can also, I always want to engage with students around what they really like. I don't ever like telling people to do something that they didn't come up with themselves. And I'll give you an example as to why. When I first started doing this work, one of the things that was always said to me about how to elicit the relaxation response was take a warm bath. Well, I'll be honest with you, I don't particularly like baths. And so every time somebody told me to take a warm bath, it didn't work because, some of you may love taking warm baths, but I'm just not one of those people. And so please keep in mind, it's not about you can brainstorm with your clients. You can brainstorm about how to do this, but please don't ever tell somebody how to relax, because I will tell you, I worked with a psychiatrist once, and we can kind of all maybe think about psychiatrists who we've worked with, but I worked with a psychiatrist once who relaxed by listening to heavy metal music. And that is not the way that I relax, but it is absolutely the way this man relaxed. Was he listened to loud, heavy metal music, and it just worked for him. So we can elicit the relaxation response in a number of different ways. It's really important, as we're going to see a little bit later on, it's really important to have a number of ways that we elicit the relaxation response. Because I think you said, Kelly, golf. And golf is a lovely way of relaxing, as long as you don't, get so frustrated when you hit it into the rough or something. But it can be a lovely way to relax. But if I'm in the middle of a 10-hour day and I'm feeling really stressed, I'm not going to be able to go play golf. So it's really important to have a number of ways to relax and elicit the relaxation response. Okay, and there is a difference. I want to be clear about that. There's not a huge difference, and we don't need to dive into really differentiating between the relaxation response and relaxing. But basically, we want to talk a little bit about what it means to actually elicit the relaxation response. And what we're going to talk about today is, in part, using mindfulness and present moment awareness to elicit the relaxation response. Okay? So again, the relaxation response being the balance of the stress response. And I used to have a slide about this, and it occurs to me, I don't think I have it in this presentation, but the relaxation response can also be known as rest and digest, right? Or feed and breed. And sometimes that gets a chuckle. But rest and digest or feed and breed, it is that time where we are focused, we are able to be calm, where our heart rate goes down. It's basically the opposite of the stress response. So rather than being ready for a fight, we are ready to relax. We are ready to engage with other people. We are ready to digest. Like when we're in stress mode, our stomachs, actually, that is not where the energy of our body is going. The energy of our body leaves our stomachs. And if we try to eat, if we try to digest during the stress response, it can be very difficult to do. And that was, like I was saying before, my husband's stomach seizes up when he's stressed. But when you're relaxed, your stomach and many other parts of your body come back online. So again, rest and digest or feed and breed. So we're going to talk today a little bit about mindfulness and present moment awareness to elicit the relaxation response. Many of you have probably seen this before. This is Jon Kabat-Zinn's definition of mindfulness: paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. So we're going to focus for a little bit today on this idea of present moment awareness. And I think this is actually a very powerful idea, especially for our adolescents and young adults. And to ask the questions, how often am I truly present? How often am I focused on what's happening here and now without being distracted with thoughts of what I have to do next? How often am I paying attention to what's happening in the present moment rather than thinking about the future or the past, or what I'm going to say when that person's finished talking? And I will say, just as an aside, that's one of the ways, one of the things that I've often talked to people about when I talk about active listening is that listening does not mean waiting for your turn to talk. Listening means actively paying attention to what the other person is saying. So this idea of how often am I truly present? How often am I truly present and focused on what's happening right now? And for us, and certainly for our adolescents and young adults, we have a lot of challenges to our present moment awareness, a lot of things that pull us out of the present moment. And these are just some of them in this, certainly in this lower left quadrant. We have social media. And social media in and of itself is designed to pull us out of the present moment. I don't know, and this is not a plug, but I don't know if anyone here has seen the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma. Have you all seen it? Yeah, I see Michael and Kelly nodding. Very powerful. If you want to take a look at it, it's a little scary about how, social media is designed to do just that, to take us out of the present moment and really capitalize on our attention but demands, in addition to social media, hopes and fears, and this idea of worrying about the past or dwelling in the past or worrying about the future. And that, I think, is actually my next slide. And this is a lot of what we see at the Anxiety Institute for our clients who are struggling mightily with anxiety. So we often see that this chronic dwelling in the past or anxious worry about the future are these behaviors that pull us out of the present moment, and are often linked to depression and anxiety. So consequently, one of the ways that we work with our clients is to focus on being in the present moment and just to notice how often your thoughts are going to what's happened in the past, to regret or worry or dwelling in the past, or this feeling of I'm worried about an unknown future. I'm fearful, I'm anxious, I'm trying to manage or control an unknown future. So again, this idea of present moment awareness. So you all can read, but grounding ourselves in present moment awareness can help us recenter and elicit the relaxation response. So I sort of like this quote, live in the present moment, that's where life is happening. So this idea of grounding ourselves in the present moment, I'm not sure if any of you have ever worked with clients with grounding, but very often when you help a client get themselves grounded, you can often help them sit in their chair, put their feet on the floor, their hands can be in their laps, and then they can engage all of their senses. They can take a look and see what's around them. They can see what they can smell, what they can hear, what they can feel, and really ground themselves, use all of their senses to ground them in the present moment. All right. One of the things that I really like to use to help people, and myself, I might add, to ground us in the present moment is the breath. So using the breath to anchor us into the present moment. And if you would indulge me for a minute, I want to take you all through a 1-minute breathing exercise. Okay? All right, and I'm not going to use a timer, so it'll be roughly 1 minute, okay? So sit in a comfortable position. And as you either soften or close your eyes, just direct your awareness to your breath. Breathing gently and naturally. Simply follow the rhythm of your breath. As you breathe in, feel your stomach and your lungs expanding. And as you breathe out, just let go of any tension you might be holding in your body. Breathe in, feel your body getting fuller, and breathe out, letting go of any tension or any stress. Breathe in, feeling alive and awake. Breathe out, feeling calm and relaxed. Breathe in, feel yourself grounded in the chair. Breathe out, feel yourself supported by the floor. And your final breath in, lengthen your breath and inhale deeply. And then slowly, slowly let go and breathe out. Okay. So that was a roughly 1 minute breathing exercise. And the reason that I like to do that with people, I hope you're feeling just a slight bit more relaxed, just a bit more grounded. The reason that I like to do that is because 1 minute doesn't seem like a lot of time. 1 minute seems like the amount of time that most of us can spare sometimes. Seems like the time that we can ask someone to take a minute. And a minute can be very powerful when we do a breathing exercise for a minute. You can find 1 minute breathing exercises just about anywhere. If you like that or found that useful or like something you might want to try with your students or your clients, lots of different apps have 1 minute breathing exercises. YouTube has tons of them. So 1 minute breathing exercises can be very powerful. Okay, so can I pause there for a second before I move on to the next bit? Next, we're going to talk about unitasking next, but I wonder if anyone has any questions about present moment, this being in the present moment that you want to talk about.
We did have a question come through, Dina. It's not really specific to the recent exercise, but someone was asking, is the connection with one's stomach and digestive tract related to the vagus nerve at all?
Yes, yes, it is. And actually, I am not a medical doctor, and I really don't want to play one on this on this presentation. But the vagus nerve is a fascinating nerve. And the other thing that we know about the stomach is that there are so many receptors in the stomach, so many receptors. And so the vagus nerve, as well as all of our cortisol and adrenaline and norepinephrine and epinephrine really are they impact the stomach as well as the entire autonomic nervous system. So I think that's about as far as I want to go. If we have any MDs or other folks that know a lot about this in the audience, please feel free to put it in the Q&A or the chat. But yes is the short answer. Anything else about present moment awareness? Again, that's sort of the first, I spent a lot of time on that, but I think that's also because in my experience, so many of the students that I've worked with over the years are really not able to be in the present moment. And yet it's one of the most powerful ways, I think, to reduce anxiety, to reduce rumination, to help people come back to center. I know for myself, I use it for myself. If I've got a particularly, big day coming up tomorrow and I'm having trouble going to sleep, I might say to myself in bed, be here right now. What do you feel? I feel my blanket. I feel the pillow. How are you right now? I'm sleepy, as opposed to getting really, really caught up in what's coming next or what's coming the next day. All right. So let's spend a little bit of time sort of talking about this next idea, which is unitasking. And Michael, you made me smile before when you were talking about multitasking, because I'm big. I used to be big on multitasking. Now I'm pretty big on unitasking. Okay, so this little graphic right here sort of represents for me what often happens when I multitask. So this idea of unitasking is exactly what it sounds like. So I'll just give you a quick definition of unitasking. Unitasking is the conscious decision to do one thing at a time, to sustain focus and stay in the present moment. Now, when I was becoming an adult, there was a lot of talk about multitasking, and multitasking was actually really seen as a skill. I think I probably had it on my resume at some point that, I was a I was wonderful at multitasking. So this is a bit of a switch from that. And I do think that this has to be conscious. I really like this definition because unitasking is a conscious decision. And I say that because I happen to believe that in our day and age, in classes, in classrooms, as well as in the work world, multitasking is the norm. And I think that multitasking is a real problem because I don't actually think, and I don't want to get into the depths of this, but again, if anybody's out in the audience and knows more about this than I do, I actually think that multitasking is a misnomer. I think that what it's asking is for us to continually shift our focus, and we never actually really land on anything and really devote attention to it and devote time and attention to it. And by doing that, we give everything we do sort of short shrift, and we don't ever fully engage. So, Michael, because you're one of the only people I see you nodding. Can you just sort of speak to that so that I can have a little bit of a dialogue with somebody?
Yeah, I mean, everything you're saying, Dina, it certainly resonates with me. I mean, I happen to believe that multitasking is kind of not really a thing per se, because, again, if you're kind of focusing on 3 or 4 or even just 2 different things going on, I mean, your ability to retain 100% of whatever's happening has to be close to impossible. I mean, if I'm having a conversation with you and I'm kind of listening, but I'm texting at the same time, I'm only taking in, X amount of whatever you're saying. So I think a lot of times as a culture, especially like you mentioned before with social media and phones, we're kind of programmed to do a lot of stuff at once. And we believe that we're absorbing everything we need to. But you ask somebody what you said, if you were talking to them for 2 minutes, they probably caught maybe 2 or 3 words.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And thank you. And I'm so glad I asked you to be in dialogue with me because I love having dialogues about this. So thank you. Much better than just hearing myself talk. No, I totally agree. And I did sort of like this. My mind is, so this is multitasking. My mind is like my internet browser. I have 19 tabs open, 3 are frozen, and I have no idea where the music is coming from. So that to me is a tongue-in-cheek way of talking about multitasking that oftentimes when we try to do too much, we're really not doing anything particularly well. And I do happen to believe, and I'm not going to be on a soapbox about social media and smartphones, but I do think that our adolescents are out. Computers are to multitask, that their phones. I don't know how many times I've talked to my own young adult children where they're on.
Dina, I don't know if you could hear me, and I don't mean to cut you off. You're cutting in and out a little bit on our end.
And they're talking to me, and I know are a little frozen still. All right, you know what, Michael, did I freeze?
You did, yeah. You're kind of in and out. You just came back. I hear you a little bit better now. You cut out for about 30 seconds there.
Okay, am I back?
That's much better now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we got you now.
Okay, all right. You froze, and I was like, uh-oh, okay. So, all right. So I think basically what I was just saying was that when you are multitasking, there really is, there's no, to what you were saying before, Michael, there's no ability to completely focus. And when you are multitasking, so I'm going to be a big proponent of unitasking. And part of why I'm a big proponent of unitasking is something that Csikszentmihalyi, so Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi is a psychologist. He's out of, I think he might still be at UPenn, I'm not sure. But I don't know if you've ever heard of this experience, the state of flow. And I happen to be a big proponent of trying to achieve a state of flow. When was the last time you lost track of something? When was the last time you lost track of time doing something you loved? And that's sort of a very quick definition of the state of flow. I want you all to think about that for yourselves, because what each of us do that really engages us. And if we want to think back to that Yerkes-Dodson curve, sort of being at the top of that bell curve where we're engaged, where we are sort of firing on all cylinders, where we're challenged, where we really love what we're doing, that's us being in a state of flow. And when we're multitasking, we cannot be in a state of flow. We don't even allow ourselves the opportunity to be in a state of flow. So I do want to talk about that for just a little bit, because I think that that's something that our students are often deprived of with all of the demands that are going on in their lives. And again, I'm going to say it again, with the smartphones and the texting and all of the different social media apps that have all of these multiple demands for their attention, that they never really are able to really get into a state of flow. I like this definition of flow, where a person is fully immersed, feeling energized, focus, involvement, really feeling, again, like you're kind of firing on all cylinders. Michael, because you're still the only person I can see, ever experienced that?
Oh, all the time. And actually, there was one that just came through that I thought was very interesting in the chat. Somebody was kind of mentioning that they let me open that up so I get the right thing. They were saying, I lose time most when I'm cooking and I'm fully engaged in the process of smells and flavors that I'm creating. But, I kind of wonder if sometimes, we kind of get distracted in a sense, because a lot of what we do, so at least for myself, some of it becomes like kind of mindless in a sense, like I'm driving and all of a sudden, 10 seconds go by and I'm like, how did I get from point A to point B? Because I think we just naturally wander. And part of that is, I think a lot of it has to do with us never being fully present in what we're doing. Like our mind is always traveling. And again, I think when we do things, the same things day in and day out, we have that routine. It almost becomes like, again, a little bit of a dissociation in a sense, where we're not fully committed to what's happening in the moment because it becomes a little monotonous.
I think that's right. And I don't think that this is like no judgment, right? That happens, and that happens to all of us. I think that achieving a state of flow is really the exception rather than the rule, even though I'm very glad to hear that, you experience it all the time. And there's people in the audience that are talking about when they experience it. I think that it is the exception rather than the rule, but we can never achieve it if we never allow ourselves to focus. We never allow ourselves to sort of unitask and be. So we're not necessarily talking about those times where your mind is drifting and you're driving or you're doing something else, but that you're really engaged. You're really engaged. I loved what they said, the person in the chat said about the senses being engaged, because very often that is a time where it can really bring us into the present moment. I think that the piece that I want to highlight here is that, how am I going to put this? These are conscious activities that we have to consciously choose to create opportunities for. And I think that's the piece that I really want to focus in on right now, is that for all of us, we need to create these opportunities for ourselves, and we need to try to create these opportunities for the adolescents and young adults that we work with. So it may seem as though we are being, rigid or demanding when we say, all right, guys, we're going to focus on one thing right now. We're not going to focus on the class that just happened, and we're not going to focus on the class that just came, and we're going to really kind of be here and now. And so I'm going to ask you to put your phones away, and I'm going to ask you, let's focus on this moment. It's not about being rigid. It's really about allowing the opportunity for focus, because I think that many of us are out of habit. We're out of the habit of focusing. We're out of the habit of unitasking. We're in the habit of multitasking. We're in the habit of always being just a bit distracted. So Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a Buddhist monk, talks about this in terms of do what you are doing. And it sounds ridiculously simple. And Thich Nhat Hanh has a book called The Miracle of Mindfulness. And he says, while washing the dishes, one should only be washing the dishes, which means one should be completely aware of the fact that one is washing the dishes. So again, I kind of love that because it's so simple, but it's about it's about really trying to become conscious of what we're doing. And again, I'm not saying this has to happen all the time, right? There's plenty of times where I'm washing the dishes or driving my car where I am really not completely aware of what I'm doing. Kind of, Michael, to your point a little while ago, that sometimes our minds just are distracted. But it's an important practice to try to focus your attention, to try to focus focus your attention. And again, using the senses can really help ground us in the present moment. If we're going to use Thich Nhat Hanh's example of washing the dishes, feel the dishes, feel the water, feel the texture of the dishes, feel the temperature of the water, feel the slipperiness of the soap, feel the sponge in your hand. If you're drying the dishes, really engage to feel like you're truly washing the dishes. I will tell you something that maybe some of you might be able to relate to. I hope for you, you can't relate to it, but maybe you can. I have had too many times in my life where I've been in the shower and 10 minutes go by and I honestly don't know whether or not I've washed my hair. Maybe I washed my hair, maybe I didn't. I have been so distracted, and so my mind is so not on the shower and what I'm doing, because I'm so concerned about my day and what's coming up and what I have to do at 9 and what I have to do at 10, that I literally look at the shampoo and say, 50-50. I'm not sure if I just washed my hair or not. No idea. And then I try to catch myself and be like, okay, if you're that distracted, maybe you need to focus a bit.
And Dina, if I could say something there, just because I know you like the back and forth as well.
I do. I love it.
But one of the things I think is, I wonder how much of this necessarily is more of like an individual issue as far as, being able to kind of consciously make time to just kind of be, in a sense, but also potentially the fact that this is more of a cultural issue. So again, what the cultural norms are is, for example, if I'm done working 9 to 5, there might still be an expectation to answer the phone at, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock. So your mind is always kind of pre-programmed to do stuff and have something going on. So to your point, you're sitting in the shower, but at the same time, you're thinking about what you have coming up at 7, 8 o'clock. So I think it's tough because even if you want to kind of get to that point of full mindfulness and full commitment to the moment, culturally, that's kind of not the norm per se. You're kind of expected to always be on the go in a sense.
Right. And so that's why I'm saying I think we need to push back against that, which is why I was saying, years ago, I truly think I had multitasking on my resume. I really think it was, multitasker, able to do blah, blah, blah. Like that's to the extent to which the culture not just supported it, but really valued it. And I'm saying I think we need to push back on that a bit. And if we're working with our students, allow them some space, allow them and maybe set the expectations, whether it's in classrooms or therapy rooms or, guidance counselors or however we're working with our clients or our students, to really support that for them so that they can push back. They can push back a little bit.
I love that.
Actually, speaking of pushing back a little bit, so I think that the third thing I really want to talk about, so present moment awareness, and then it is really creating a moment of space. Okay, really want to talk about this idea of creating a moment of space. So I put it really large on this slide. Take a moment. And yes, you're absolutely right, Michael, that sometimes this is about pushing back. I've often talked to clients about even responding, clients that somehow don't know how to respond or have a hard time creating boundaries or saying no. Very often it can be about responding by saying, I need a moment. I need a moment. Can I also ask, Michael, how are we doing on time? Can you tell me how we're doing on time?
What are we at? I figured if you go to like 1:15, Dina, and then we could save some time at the end for questions and wrap up by 1:30,
Perfect.
I think we'd be good.
Okay. All right. So let me try to do this a little on the quicker side, but creating a moment of space. And I think hopefully all of these concepts are related, but to my mind, this is also about allowing yourself to say, I need a moment. I need a moment to think. Michael, are you there? Okay. You guys are there. You're not frozen on me, right? Okay.
Nope, we got you.
Okay. Really pushing back a little bit and saying, I need a moment. I need a moment to think. Sometimes just taking a moment. And I think this is where we can really model for our students and our clients. We can really help them start to give themselves permission to take a moment. And I know this sounds very simple, but it can be very powerful. One of my favorite quotes comes from a psychologist, Viktor Frankl. And Frankl says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. So I just want to take a minute to focus on that. Because I think that so often in the world that we live in, there's such a push for the immediate response. There's such a demand for quick response, quick action, quick answers, that we don't often allow space or request space or demand space to think and to consider. And the reason I like Frankl's quote so much is because I love this idea of creating a space between stimulus and response, between the impulse and the action, if you will. Just create a moment to think, a moment to consider, a moment to check in with yourself, a moment to say, how do I want to respond? What do I think about this? And again, I really want to sort of reiterate this idea of modeling this for our students, modeling this for our clients. And then this idea that in that space, that's where we get to choose how we're going to respond or not respond. So there's one more slide about that. I kind of like this. Finding that moment of space between impulse and action can be one of the great challenges of our emotional lives. And I do think that we need to encourage our students to just slow down a little bit, to be in the present moment, to check in with themselves, to really give themselves permission to pause and check in, and then to make a choice about how they want to react. And that's just one more slide on the same idea. So I'll start to wrap this up. So keys to counteracting the negative effects of stress: regular practice of present moment awareness, intentionally pausing to create moments of space between impulse and action, and then elicitation of the relaxation response for micro recovery moments throughout the day. And this is the last concept that I want to talk about quickly, that as we talk about recovery, as we talk about chronic stress, and then that balancing with recovery, that balancing with the elicitation of the relaxation response, talking about recovery as the relaxation response, we talk about 3 different types of recovery. We talk about macro recovery, which are those vacations that we just can't wait for, those big breaks. You know, when I used to work at a college, it was those breaks in between semesters where you had a month off, where you had the summer off. Those are macro recoveries, right? Or even meso recoveries, long weekends or mental health days, holiday breaks, things like that. Except we can't wait for a macro recovery. We can't even wait for the meso recoveries. Our bodies can't wait 2 months for a vacation. Sometimes our bodies can't even wait 2 weeks for a long weekend. So what I would suggest and what I advocate for are what we call micro recovery breaks, brief periods of rest and recovery that you can employ throughout the day to reset your system, to rebalance your system. So again, this idea of micro recovery. So create a micro recovery toolkit for yourself. Encourage your clients, your adolescents, your young adults to create a micro recovery toolkit for themselves that they can use each day in various circumstances. I'll give you a quick glance at some of the tools in my micro recovery toolkit. So I like to breathe deeply, anywhere from a half a minute to a minute, sort of like the one we did together. If I've got a little bit longer than a minute, I might listen to a piece of calming music for, usually music, you know, you can find a piece of music for 2.5 or 3 minutes. I'm a big tea drinker. Sometimes I'll go use the hot water function in our water bottle, our water machine, whatever you call it, our water cooler. I'll make myself a cup of hot tea. If I really think I've got 5 minutes, I'll stretch. And then at least once a day, I try really hard to take a 10-minute walk. And sometimes I'm stuck in our building and I'll just walk for 10 minutes inside our building. If I'm really lucky, I walk outside. So bottom line, stress is everywhere. Stress is all around us. How we choose to respond, how we consciously choose to respond, can have a huge impact on whether or not we experience chronic stress. But it is possible with practice to elicit the relaxation response and balance our stress response for improved health and well-being. You have the power to manage your stress. These are just reiterating what I said before: present moment awareness, pauses between impulse and action, and micro recovery breaks throughout your day. So that's it. That's what I got.